One of the biggest problems with Hogwarts Legacy is the protagonist. They are crucial to the story, powerful beyond belief, and present in every story moment. However, they never feel like an actual character. They don't feel connected to the events around them. They arrive at Hogwarts late, but at just the right time for all the events in the story to occur, with them at the center. The goal of this specific rewrite is to make the protagonist feel more like a real Hogwarts student, with history, relationships, flaws, and a clear emotional role in the narrative. They will be customizable by the player, but not a blank slate. They will be special, not because they happen to be able to wield ancient magic, but because of who they choose to be. Hogwarts Legacy's premise for the protagonist is fascinating. A new fifth year is completely different from anything we've seen before, and it opens up a lot of possibilities for the story and gameplay. But this would-be disruption seems to largely be ignored. They arrive late, adapt almost immediately, and quickly become the most capable student at Hogwarts. The protagonist is completely separated from everything that occurs at the school. They have no history and no real connection to most of the strongest parts of the game. For Sebastian's story, they don't really know Anne, don't really know Ominous, and don't get to see the full deterioration of Sebastian over time. Ancient magic features similar issues. On paper, it should be a defining trait for the protagonist. They have the ability to see and use a form of ancient magic that no one else can use, let alone see, and that should fundamentally alter how they see themselves and their place in the world. In the game, ancient magic really just functions as a plot device in terms of story and a special move in terms of gameplay. The protagonist is special because the story says they are special, but there's almost nothing derived from it. We're going to keep everything that's currently in the character creator section and then add choices for the protagonist's background. Blood and wealth status are two obvious choices for the player to shape their character. A wealthy pureblood, a poor muggleborn, and a middle-class half-blood would all enter Hogwarts with different assumptions, pressures, and social experiences. Your choices here won't completely change the main story, but will affect the role-playing and choices that can be made. Your choices here would alter things like the dialogue options that the player has, choices for quests, etc. These choices should be meaningful, with impacts on the gameplay and story. While the protagonist, regardless of choices here, will still have the same central arc and main story, differences should be enough to encourage role-playing and replayability. For this rewrite, the player begins with the receiving of their Hogwarts letter, with a different opening depending on the choices in the character creator section. The opening then follows the classic path of a new student at Hogwarts. The protagonist travels to Diagon Alley to gather their supplies, then heads to platform 9 3/4 to board the Hogwarts Express, crosses the Great Lake on the boats, and finally arrives at the sorting ceremony. Everything here will be expanded upon in the full rewrite video, but to give one example, the player will be sorted in a very different way than how it presently is. The first 3 years serve as the playable prologue. This introduces the basic systems, familiarizes players with the school, sets the tone of Hogwarts life, etc. We don't want to simulate the full years in extensive detail, but to establish the characters and narrative that the original game was lacking. Year 1 is all about arrival. The protagonist arrives at Hogwarts, learns the castle, meets their classmates, attends classes for the first time, and begins to understand their place in the school. Similar to the earliest Harry Potter books, the tone is lighter, curious, and focused on childlike discovery. Year 2 is the warmest part. Early friendships have become more comfortable, and the protagonist truly feels that they belong at Hogwarts. The most important friendship for this story, between the protagonist, Anne, Sebastian, and Ominous, is truly focused on, and Hogwarts feels like the place it is supposed to. Year 3 is where the foundation begins to darken. Anne's curse gradually enters the story, not as a single dramatic reveal, but as something that slowly begins to disrupt normal life. By the end of the 3rd year, Anne's condition is so severe that she can no longer remain at Hogwarts. Year 4 is skipped over in a time skip, setting up our story to take place during the 5th year, similar to how Hogwarts Legacy currently is, allowing for all the benefits, but hopefully removing most of the drawbacks. Sebastian, Anne, and Ominous represent some of the warmest parts of the protagonist's life at school. They are young, mischievous kids that have a fun dynamic that evolves over the prologue. In Hogwarts Legacy, Anne is essential to Sebastian's motivation, but the player barely knows her and speaks to her for maybe 3 minutes total. For this rewrite, the player will see her around the castle, in classes, during holidays, at Hogsmeade, etc. If the protagonist personally knows her, they will care about her more. When Anna's cursed over the summer between the second and third year, it's not revealed straight away, but instead over the year with small hints and disruptions that change the dynamic. Eventually, it will be revealed, with Anne telling the player, and by the end of the third year, she no longer attends the school. Anne is one of the protagonist's closest friends. When this happens to her, it's not something that happens to a fellow student's sister, but a friend. Someone the protagonist has memories with, and when the protagonist wants to help, it's not due to heroism or because it's a quest, but because the protagonist doesn't want to lose someone they are close to. In terms of Sebastian, this change should enhance him as well. Sebastian's descent is more painful because the protagonist has known him for years, before desperation has warped who he once was. We see him at first as someone who is still troubled due to his childhood, and thus has become even more attached to Anne, giving extra motivation to his choices. Ominous is someone in this version that can appeal to the protagonist on a much more personal level as well. Knowing the protagonist for years, being one of his closest friends at Hogwarts, he can tell the story of his childhood to the protagonist, instead of Sebastian telling them. Ancient magic doesn't really have much of a presence in the base game, and mainly serves as a plot device. For the rewrite, ancient magic will remain rare and poorly understood. No one alive can use it, and those in the past that could have used it might not have understood that it was different from standard magic. Ancient magic should seem older, more powerful, and more natural than standard magic, but the exacts should remain unclear. It should feel wondrous because we do not understand the limits. For the protagonist, ancient magic is something they will discover and learn to see as a gift. Over time, however, they will begin to see this power as a responsibility. If they alone can use the power, and if said power can help solve issues, how could they not use it? The protagonist is drawn to ancient magic because of its ability to help. Motivation might vary depending on the character, their background, house, etc., but when they see suffering and power in front of them, the question becomes, how far do I need to go? Ancient magic is not evil, nor is it good. It depends on how it is used and why it is used. Responsibility to use power for good becomes muddied into something more like permission in any scenario. The dark arts are already feared, condemned, and surrounded by social and legal taboos in this world. Ancient magic is something that no one really understands, and thus easier to justify the use of. Obviously, this leads it to being more tempting. Sebastian's path may seem dangerous almost immediately, but the protagonist's path may appear noble right up until the end. Isidora Morganach will have her own character quest. Instead of only seeing her character as someone in the past, we will be able to directly interact with her as if she were still alive today. Isidora is a warning. She is the clearest example of someone who looked at suffering and pain, believed she had the power to remove it, and became convinced this power gave her the right to act. She's a previous version of the same moral temptation that our protagonist undergoes. Like the protagonist, she encountered pain, had access to ancient magic, and wanted to help the world. If Isidora had been motivated by cruelty or ambition, she would be much easier to dismiss. The Isidora we meet in this game will be one that has not been beat down by the Keepers, but one that is still hopeful and confident in her grand vision. Isidora, as someone who does not know her specific fate, will not be a strict villain nor hero. The player, and Isidora, can wonder if she failed because she was reckless, if she misunderstood the magic, if she was not powerful enough, or if the goal was flawed from the beginning. Players can interpret her story as a warning to stop or a challenge to succeed where she failed. Players should easily be able to tell themselves Isidora was, or was not, wrong in principle. Perhaps she went too far, perhaps she used the magic incorrectly, or perhaps the protagonist, with more caution, knowledge, or power, can do what she could not. The goal is to make it so that Isidora's story does not automatically prevent the protagonist from repeating her mistakes. It should give certain players a way to rationalize them continuing. Perhaps this history is not warning them away from the path, but asking them to perfect it. Isidora will be fully explored in her own video because there is much to say, but for the protagonist, her role is clear. She is one endpoint that the protagonist could reach, could avoid, or could surpass. I don't want to make the protagonist a completely fixed character with no room for role-playing, but I don't think the blank slate approach works for the character. With no room to grow or change, to react to everything around them, there's a lot of storytelling potential that is wasted. For this, I want the character to be customizable, to be shaped by the player. I want them to be a student, a friend, and someone that feels like they belong to this world. The protagonist should be one of players' favorite characters, and not just the camera by which they view the story.